Before we begin, let me welcome you here. If you find meaning in stories about family, sacrifice, and the quiet strength of mothers, you're in the right place. Subscribe if you haven't already. It helps us keep sharing these voices, and it tells us you believe, as we do, that no family should walk through their darkest nights alone. Now, the story you're about to hear carries a title that still makes my chest tighten whenever I say it out loud. I took the night shift so my daughter could sleep, then I found the truth. It was 2:07 in the morning when I first heard it. Not the gentle whimper of my newborn grandson, not the rustle of sheets as my daughter stirred upstairs, but something else. Something that didn't belong? A laugh. It floated up from the baby monitor on the nightstand beside me. At first, I thought it was a dream, some stray sound caught in the half-awake world between midnight and morning. But then it came again, low, male, and unfamiliar. I froze. The house was dark and still. My daughter, exhausted from the fog of postpartum depression, was finally asleep in the next room. I had taken the night shift gladly, rocking the baby, changing diapers, pacing the floor with lullabies under my breath, because every mother knows, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for your child is simply give her rest. But that laugh? It didn't belong. My son-in-law was supposed to be away on a late shift. At least that's what he told us. He often left me in charge, saying he had extra work to catch up on. I never questioned it until now. I leaned closer to the monitor. The green glow of the screen showed the crib, the baby sleeping soundly, tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. But the sound didn't come from that room. It was coming from the kitchen, faint but unmistakable, the low murmur of a man's voice, followed by another burst of laughter. And then a woman's voice. My hands trembled as I turned the volume higher. Words blurred together just beyond clarity. But the cadence, the intimacy was sharp as broken glass. At 2 a.m. in my daughter's house, with my grandson asleep and my daughter vulnerable upstairs, someone else was here. The laughter cut through me like a cold wind, carrying with it the first sting of suspicion, the first taste of dread. I pressed the monitor to my chest, as though I could muffle the sound. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might wake the baby. And in that moment, I knew. The night shift I had taken out of love would soon pull me into a truth I was never meant to hear. A truth that would shatter everything. Sleep in that house was a fragile thing. Even when silence fell, it was never the restful kind. My daughter drifted into it like someone collapsing into water, exhausted, heavy, barely afloat. The doctors called it postpartum depression. I called it heartbreak. She had always been a bright spirit. As a girl, Sarah would wake me in the mornings with a smile, her hair tangled and wild, insisting we make pancakes even on school days. She had a stubborn optimism about life, the sort of cheer that could brighten a room no matter how gray the day outside. But after the birth of her son, that light dimmed. I saw it in her eyes first. A distant glaze, as though she were standing in two worlds at once, one with me and the baby, and one where shadows swallowed her whole. Some nights she sat upright in bed, staring at the wall for hours, her body rigid with exhaustion but her mind restless and unforgiving. Other mornings she could not rise at all, and I would hear muffled sobs through the thin bedroom door. "It's just the hormones," her husband would say with a dismissive wave. "She'll get over it, everyone does. But mothers know we read our children in ways no one else can." Her smile was gone, her laughter absent. She ate little, spoke even less. It wasn't just hormones, it was a storm inside her. So I stepped in. I told her, "Sleep, darling. I'll take the baby tonight." I carried my grandson in my arms through those long hours, pacing the hallways, humming lullabies from decades past. I did it so she could rest, so she could heal. I thought if she could just close her eyes long enough, maybe morning would bring her back a little piece of herself. At first, her husband seemed grateful. He called me a blessing. He brought me tea, thanked me for helping. But there was something in his gratitude that felt convenient. The longer I stayed, the more I noticed how easily he disappeared. He claimed overtime shifts, late-night meetings, errands that stretched long into the night. And when he was home, he played the role of devoted partner so perfectly it almost felt rehearsed, standing by her bedside with a damp cloth, holding the baby just long enough for her to notice, then slipping away. It was as if he wanted me to see him as the savior, the husband who cared so deeply. while quietly ensuring the real work fell on my shoulders. Sarah never noticed. She was too tired to see through the curtain he pulled around their lives. Her energy went into surviving the day, feeding the baby, holding him, trying not to drown in her own mind. She clung to her husband's words as if they were lifelines. When he told her she was just tired, she believed him. When he said, "We'll get through this," she nodded, trusting his promise. But I was watching more closely. It was in the bills that piled up unopened on the counter, even though he bragged about his overtime. It was in the way he spoke over her, making decisions without her input. What pediatrician to see, what credit card to use, even what she should eat. It was in the way her eyes darted to him, searching for approval like a child waiting for permission. And it was in the smallest things, the car keys always in his pocket, the baby monitor he insisted on placing in the kitchen when it wasn't needed, the way he flinched when I picked up his phone, even just to move it off the table. I tucked these details away, though at the time I didn't know what puzzle they would form. I only knew something was off. The ground beneath my daughter's marriage wasn't steady, and she was too fragile to see it. That night, after the laughter on the monitor, I sat in the rocking chair with my grandson against my chest, his breath warm, his little fingers curling in sleep. I stared at Sarah's closed door, imagining her inside, finally resting, wrapped in blankets, trying to heal. She trusted her husband, trusted me, trusted the walls of this house to keep her safe. But safety is an illusion, I realized. It can be broken with a single sound in the dark. The laugh haunted me. It replayed in my mind over and over, each time sharper, more sinister. Who was in the house with him? What did it mean? And why? Why, when my daughter needed him most, was he downstairs, laughing in another woman's voice? I thought of waking her, shaking her gently, and telling her what I'd heard. But then I pictured her eyes, red, swollen, desperate for peace. She needed sleep like she needed air. And if I took that from her, what would she have left? So I stayed quiet. I stayed in the rocking chair until dawn, listening for every creak, every whisper, every betrayal the house might let slip. My grandson stirred once, whimpered softly, then drifted back into dreams. The sun began to seep through the blinds, pale and thin. The world outside stretched into morning, ordinary and unknowing. But in that house, nothing was ordinary anymore. And as Sarah came down the stairs hours later, hair tangled, voice faint as she whispered, "Thank you, Mom," I looked at her and realized something chilling. The storm inside her was real. But another storm, darker and more deliberate, was gathering around her. And I was the only one awake to see it. Morning light can be deceptive. It spills across the kitchen counter, warms the tile floor, and makes everything appear gentler than it really is. That day, as I poured coffee into chipped mugs and laid out toast, I almost believed the night's laughter had been a dream. Almost, but then he walked in. My son-in-law, tie slightly loosened, shirt wrinkled, hair damp as if he'd rushed through a shower, strolled into the room humming to himself. He kissed Sarah on the cheek, complimented the baby's smile, and dropped his phone face down on the counter like a magician hiding a trick card. "Rough night?" he asked me casually, reaching for the sugar bowl. I studied his face, trying to find some crack in the performance. "Not too rough," I said. "The baby slept well." He nodded as though I'd given the correct answer to a test. Then he turned his attention to Sarah, who leaned against the counter with that weary slump I had come to know too well. "Sweetheart, I'll run those errands later today," he said, brushing her hair back from her face. "You just focus on resting. Mom here can handle the rest." I saw her shoulders drop, relief mingled with shame. She hated that she needed so much help, and he knew it. He spoke the words with kindness, but underneath was an edge of ownership, a reminder that she wasn't strong enough, that without him, and without me, she was nothing. That was the first sign. The second came that afternoon. I was folding laundry when I noticed a faint scent clinging to one of his shirts. It wasn't Sarah's perfume. Hers had always been light, floral, like fresh lilies. This was different, sweet, heavy, unfamiliar. I held the shirt in my hands longer than necessary, pressing it to my face, searching for a logical explanation. A hug from a coworker? A spritz from a department store? But logic dissolved under memory. The laugh from the night before. Warm and intimate, my stomach tightened. I folded the shirt carefully and placed it at the bottom of the pile. Some truths, I told myself, must be gathered piece by piece. The third sign arrived in the form of paper, bills stacked on the counter, envelopes with bold red lettering, late notices, balances past due. Yet only days earlier, he had boasted about his extra hours at work, the overtime he was sacrificing to provide for his family. I asked him gently, "Are things all right with the finances?" He flashed me a smile too quick, too practiced. "Of course. Just a mix-up with the billing, I'll sort it out." He slid the envelopes into his briefcase before Sarah could see them. She didn't notice, or maybe she chose not to. That night, while Sarah slept and the baby breathed softly in the crib, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook in front of me. I began to write, not stories, not worries, but facts. The date, the perfume, the bills, the way his phone never left his pocket unless it was placed face down within reach. I wrote it all because I knew memory could be fragile, especially when mixed with fear. If I was going to protect my daughter, I needed to be clear-eyed, methodical. The fourth sign came louder than the rest. It was a Thursday evening, and Sarah had finally agreed to eat a real meal. I cooked her favorite, chicken soup with wide noodles, the kind she loved as a girl. She managed a few spoonfuls before excusing herself, too tired to finish. When she was gone, he leaned across the table and whispered, "You really should stop indulging her, you know." I stared at him. "Indulging? She needs to get back to normal," he said firmly. "The more you coddle her, the longer this depression will last. She needs discipline, structure." I clenched my spoon until it rattled against the bowl. "She just gave birth. She's not lazy, she's unwell." He smiled faintly, almost pitying. "You're old-fashioned. You don't understand how fragile the mind can be. If we don't take charge now, she'll drown in this weakness. And then where will we be?" The word weakness cut through me like glass. I wanted to shout, to throw the soup in his face, to demand how dare he reduce my daughter's suffering to laziness. But I didn't. I lowered my eyes to the bowl and let him believe he had won. Because sometimes silence is not surrender, it is strategy. That night, I rocked my grandson and thought of storms. The one inside Sarah, yes, but also the one brewing beneath her roof. He was not just inattentive or selfish. He was building a narrative, one where she was weak, incompetent, unfit. And with every word he spoke, he was writing her role deeper into that story. And I knew, as surely as I knew the lines on my own hands, that stories have consequences. The laugh at 2 a.m. had been the crack in the dam, but now the water was rising, and the walls around my daughter's life were beginning to tremble. I kissed my grandson's soft head, whispered promises into his skin, promises I would keep. Because while Sarah fought her battles in silence, I would not be silent. I would watch. I would listen. I would gather every sign, every slip, every fragment of truth until I had the whole of it. And when the time came, I would not let him bury her beneath his lies. Not my daughter, not my family. The house was quiet again, the kind of quiet that only comes in the hours when the world is supposed to sleep. I sat in the rocking chair, my grandson warm against my chest, and thought about the notebook in the kitchen drawer, the one filling with observations, dates, and details that gnawed at me like hungry moths. It was close to midnight when I noticed the glow. The baby monitor, propped on the nightstand, blinked with a small green light. I reached for it absently, expecting the usual soft static or the steady hum of white noise. Instead, the screen flickered, catching the dim outline of the crib. My grandson lay curled in the corner, still dreaming. I turned up the volume slightly, hoping the sound might soothe me into calm, but calm was not what came. A creak, a shuffle, voices, not in the nursery, not anywhere near my sleeping daughter upstairs. These sounds drifted from somewhere else, the kitchen again. I stared at the monitor, frowning. It wasn't supposed to pick up anything beyond the baby's room. Yet here it was, pulling in whispers from the belly of the house. At first, just murmurs. Then a soft laugh, higher pitched this time, unmistakably feminine. My skin prickled. I held my breath and pressed closer to the tiny screen, though it showed nothing but the peaceful crib. The voices were muffled but distinct, his low rumble, her playful lilt, a clink of glasses, the scrape of a chair leg on tile. I froze, my mind racing through possibilities. A neighbor? No, who lets a neighbor in at midnight? A coworker, perhaps, but why here? Why now while his wife slept under the same roof? And then the sound that made my heart drop into my stomach, a kiss. The microphone, sensitive as it was, picked up the wet smudge of lips meeting lips. followed by another burst of laughter. My hands trembled so violently I almost dropped the device. My grandson stirred in my arms, squirming as if to echo my distress. I hushed him softly, patting his back, though my own lungs felt too tight for breath. I wanted to believe I was mistaken, that fatigue had bent the truth into something darker than it was, but fatigue cannot invent a kiss. I needed proof. Carefully, I placed my grandson back in his crib. He sighed, curled tighter, and drifted on without waking. I crept toward the hallway, monitor still in hand, my bare feet silent against the carpet. The stairs groaned beneath me, each step a warning. I held the railing, forcing my body to stillness until I reached the landing. From there, I could see the faint glow spilling out from the kitchen doorway, the cold blue wash of the refrigerator light. I leaned forward just enough to glimpse the edge of the scene. Two figures sat at the table. His back was to me, broad shoulders relaxed, hand draped casually over the wrist of the woman seated across from him. She was laughing, tossing her hair, her voice like a knife drawn carelessly across a plate. And my daughter slept upstairs, her mind fragile, her trust whole. My knees went weak. I clutched the banister to steady myself. I could not burst in, not yet. Confrontation without evidence could be twisted, denied. He was clever, smooth-tongued, skilled at reshaping reality. He could paint me as paranoid, overprotective, even delusional. Sarah, in her exhaustion, might believe him, so I retreated. Step by careful step, I climbed back to the nursery, my body rigid with fury and fear. When I reached the rocking chair again, I opened the drawer of the side table and pulled out my phone. My fingers shook as I navigated to the monitor's settings, discovering something I hadn't noticed before, a recording option. One press and the device would capture both sound and video. I tapped it. The red light blinked. The screen kept showing the crib, but the voices, the laughter, the murmurs, the betrayal continued to stream through. Now they would be preserved. Now, finally, it would not be just my word against his. I sat there in the dark, the hum of the recording steady, my grandson's breath soft against the silence. Rage boiled inside me, but beneath it was a colder, sharper resolve. This was no longer just suspicion, it was fact. By morning, I would add the file to my notebook, alongside the perfume, the bills, the dismissive words. The story was writing itself, piece by piece, and soon there would be no denying it. I glanced at the crib. My grandson twitched in sleep, a small fist opening and closing as if reaching for something unseen. "I'll protect you," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I meant him, my daughter, or myself, perhaps all three. Downstairs, the laughter rose again, careless, cruel, oblivious to the damage it was sowing. I pressed the monitor close to my chest and listened, every nerve alight, every promise inside me hardening into steel, because the storm had broken, and I would not let it sweep my family away. Morning arrived as though nothing had happened. The sun filtered through the blinds, the smell of coffee drifted through the air, and the sound of my grandson's cooing filled the kitchen. Ordinary life. That was his trick, making the extraordinary sins of the night dissolve into the ordinariness of morning. He moved through the house with the confidence of a man who believed no one had seen him. He kissed Sarah's cheek, his lips brushing the very face he had betrayed hours earlier. He asked her how she had slept, though he hadn't been beside her bed. He leaned over the baby with exaggerated tenderness, tickling tiny feet until giggles bubbled into the room, and my daughter smiled, tired, grateful, utterly unaware. "Thank you for staying with him, Mom," she told me, rubbing her eyes. I finally slept through the night. Her husband gave a soft laugh, the kind that sounded warm to anyone who didn't know better. "See, teamwork. We're all in this together." The words nearly choked me. I busied myself with the dishes so she wouldn't see the fire in my eyes. My hands shook as I scrubbed the same plate over and over, trying to erase the image of him at the kitchen table with that woman, their laughter spilling into the baby monitor like poison. Later that morning, he sat across from Sarah with a stack of papers spread across the table. "Bills," he explained, his voice heavy with performance. "I've been handling them, but it's getting tight. We may need to dip into your savings just until I catch up with all the overtime." My ears sharpened. Her savings? Sarah frowned. "But I thought we were okay. You said work was covering things." He sighed, playing the role of the overburdened provider. "It is, mostly. but with your medical bills, the hospital, the baby's expenses, it's piling up faster than I expected. He slid a pen toward her. If you just sign this, I can move funds over and take care of everything. She hesitated, eyes clouding with guilt. I don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, he interrupted smoothly, covering her hand with his. You're my wife. I'll take care of you, but I can only do that if you trust me to manage things. His tone was gentle, but his grip was firm. I stepped forward, unable to stay silent. Sarah, maybe you should read through everything first. Both of them looked up. He smiled at me, polite on the surface but sharp underneath. Of course, she can take her time. We have nothing to hide, right, honey? Sarah nodded quickly, as if she needed to reassure him. I saw it in her eyes, the doubt, the exhaustion, the desperate desire to believe in him, and I saw how carefully he steered her, always just enough reassurance to keep her tethered, always just enough control to keep her dependent. That evening, when Sarah went upstairs to rest, he lingered in the kitchen with me. He poured himself a drink, leaned against the counter, and watched me with a sly tilt of his head. You've been helping a lot, he said. I know Sarah appreciates it. I do too. I met his gaze but said nothing. He smirked. But maybe don't overwhelm her with worry. She's fragile right now. She needs to believe everything is okay. Is it? I asked. His eyes narrowed, the smirk fading for just a moment. Then it was back, quick as a mask being adjusted. Of course it is. Everything is fine. He raised his glass in a mock toast and left the room. That night, while the house slept, I sat with the baby monitor again. I scrolled through the recordings, my finger trembling as I replayed the laughter, the voices, the clink of glasses. Evidence. Real, undeniable evidence. But evidence meant nothing if Sarah wasn't ready to see it. She trusted him more than herself right now. Postpartum depression had carved holes in her confidence, and he filled them with his words, his reassurances, his demands. If I showed her too soon, she might reject me instead of him. I thought of the papers he had slid across the table, the pen in her hand, the way she had looked at him with equal parts fear and devotion. He was building something brick by brick, a story in which he was the hero, she was the helpless damsel, and I was the meddling mother-in-law. And if I wasn't careful, she might believe it. The next morning, he returned from work with a bouquet of flowers. For my beautiful wife, he said, laying them gently in front of Sarah. She gasped softly, tears springing to her eyes. You didn't have to. Of course I did, he interrupted. You deserve everything. He wrapped his arms around her, looking over her shoulder directly at me. His smile was triumphant, smug, a private warning. She's mine. She believes me. You can't touch this. But he was wrong. Because while he performed devotion, I had the truth. And truth has a way of breaking through masks, no matter how carefully they're worn. I picked up my grandson, holding him close as though I could shield us both from the storm. My notebook waited in the drawer, the monitor still recording, the evidence mounting. I whispered into the baby's soft hair, words only he and I would hear. He thinks he's winning, but he has no idea who he's dealing with. And as my daughter smiled at the flowers, unaware of the thorns, I made a silent vow. I would not let him bleed her dry. Not while I was still breathing. It is a strange thing to carry the truth alone. It feels heavy, like a stone pressed into the chest, and yet it is invisible to everyone else. I walked through that house with the knowledge of what I had seen, what I had heard, and no one, not even my own daughter, could sense it. Sarah moved about in her slow, weary rhythm. She fed the baby with tired hands, folded laundry in silence, drifted into naps at odd hours. Her mind, already clouded by exhaustion, seemed to hover on the edge of something darker. She clung to small gestures from her husband as though they were lifelines. A cup of tea, a brief touch on the shoulder, a bouquet of flowers left on the counter. Each time I wanted to scream, "Don't you see? Don't you see the performance?" But I stayed silent, because that was the cruelest part of the truth. I could not hand it to her like a gift. If I tried to place it in her hands, she might drop it. She might push me away. She might choose him, and losing her would mean losing everything. That afternoon, I found her sitting in the nursery with the baby asleep in her arms. The room was warm, lit by a soft stream of sunlight, and for a moment she looked like the girl she had once been, gentle, hopeful, unbroken. "Mom," she whispered, her voice catching. "Do you think I'm failing?" The question pierced me. "No," I said firmly, kneeling beside her. "You are exhausted. You are healing. But failing? Never. Tears welled in her eyes. He says I need to be stronger, that I'm letting everyone down. I bit my tongue until I tasted iron. How easily his words slipped into her bloodstream, poisoning her from within. You are not letting anyone down, I told her. You brought life into this world. That is strength beyond measure. She nodded, but her face remained doubtful. And in that moment, I realized the depth of my dilemma. If I told her everything about the perfume, the bills, the woman in the kitchen at midnight, what would it do to her fragile spirit? Would it free her or would it shatter her completely? That night, I paced the hallway while the house slept. I thought of my late husband, his steady voice in the years when we raised Sarah together. He had been a man who valued truth above comfort, but he also knew when to hold his tongue. I could almost hear him saying, wait, gather more, be certain. Timing is everything, so I waited, I watched, I gathered. I checked the baby monitor twice, sometimes 3 times in the night, listening for the faintest sound. I thumbed through the bills he had hidden in his briefcase, memorizing numbers and dates. I noted the way his phone lit up at odd hours, always turned away from Sarah's view. And still the question burned, when do I tell her? The answer seemed to come one evening, though not in the way I expected. Sarah had tried to make dinner, simple pasta, nothing complicated. But halfway through boiling the noodles, she broke down, dropping the spoon and sinking to the floor in tears. I can't do this, she sobbed. I can't do anything right. I rushed to her, cradling her like I had when she was a child. Her husband came in moments later, his expression carefully arranged into concern. What happened? He asked, though he could see clearly. She's just tired, I said. He crouched beside her, stroking her hair. Sweetheart, you have to try harder. You can't let the baby see you like this. You don't want him growing up thinking his mother was weak. The cruelty was hidden in kindness, but it cut deep. Sarah wept harder, burying her face in my shoulder. I looked at him then, really looked. And I saw the satisfaction flicker across his eyes before he masked it with pity. He was winning. Each word he spoke tightened the rope around her, convincing her she was unworthy, convincing her she needed him. It was then I knew silence was no longer an option. But still, I could not rush. I had to be deliberate, careful. I needed her to see the truth with her own eyes, not just through my words. That night, after Sarah finally fell asleep, I sat in the kitchen with my notebook open. Page after page, filled with details, patterns, fragments of his deception. I laid out the evidence as if preparing for trial, because in a way, that was what this would become. And as I wrote, I made a vow. I would choose the moment. I would set the stage. I would reveal the truth not as a weapon to wound her, but as a light to guide her out of the darkness. The burden of silence would soon end, but until that moment arrived, I would carry it for both of us. I closed the notebook, pressed my hand to its cover, and whispered to the quiet house, "You will not break her, not while I am here." The morning after I made my vow, the house felt different. Not quieter, not louder, simply charged, as though every wall, every floorboard, every ticking clock had become a witness to what was happening here. I moved through the day with a purpose that Sarah could not see. She drifted between the nursery and her bed, exhausted, while her husband played the part of caretaker. But I was no longer just watching. I was collecting. It began with the bills. He had been careless, stuffing envelopes into his briefcase in plain sight, assuming no one noticed. But I noticed. When he left the house that morning, I opened the briefcase drawer he always forgot to lock. Inside, the stack of unopened mail bulged like a wound. I spread the envelopes across the table. Late notices, overdue credit cards, utility bills months behind. His salary alone could not have led to this collapse, not when Sarah's savings should have offered a cushion. Unless, of course, that money was already gone. I photographed every page with my phone, my hand steady though my heart raced. Each image felt like a stone added to the foundation I was building. Next came the phone. I had learned his habits well. The passcode entered too quickly, the phone always face down. But arrogance makes men sloppy. That evening, while he showered, he left the device charging on the counter. I picked it up, breathing deeply to calm my nerves, and tried the code I had seen him punch in countless times, his birthday. The screen unlocked on the first try. The messages were a flood of betrayal, long threads with a contact labeled simply R. A woman by her tone. Phrases scrolled past my eyes like knives. Last night was perfect. She'll never know. You deserve better than a tired wife. Worse still were the bank transfers linked directly to her name. Small amounts at first, dinners, gifts, hotels, then larger sums, disguised as consulting fees or business expenses. My daughter's money siphoned away under her very nose. I photographed everything, each message, each receipt. Evidence piece by piece. By the time I set the phone back, my pulse hammered in my ears. But beneath the adrenaline was a grim satisfaction. He believed himself untouchable. He believed no one was watching. He was wrong. The baby monitor became my ally, night after night. I set it to record, not just the nursery, but the murmurs it captured from the kitchen. The device was never meant for this, but it bore witness all the same. And each recording told the same story. Laughter, whispers, glasses clinking in the dark. On one especially cold night, I caught a conversation clearer than ever before. "Don't worry," his voice murmured, low and confident. "She's too tired to notice anything. I'll make sure she signs the transfer papers soon." A pause followed by the woman's laugh. "And if she doesn't?" "She will," he said flatly. "She doesn't have a choice." The monitor captured it all, the tone, the malice, the certainty of a man who thought he had already won. I saved the file, labeled it carefully, and backed it up 3 times. But the hardest part was not gathering the evidence. It was carrying it quietly alone. At breakfast, Sarah sat across from me, stirring her tea absently. Her husband reached over, squeezing her hand, his voice dripping with false tenderness. "You'll feel better soon," he said. "We'll get through this." She nodded, grateful, blind. And I wanted to shout, "No, you won't. He's not saving you. He's drowning you." But instead, I smiled faintly and folded my hands in my lap, because timing was everything. And my evidence, no matter how damning, would mean nothing if I revealed it too soon. That evening, after the house had settled into silence, I spread the photos and recordings across my notebook. A web of lies, now tangible, undeniable. Late bills, hidden transfers, messages to another woman, recordings of betrayal whispered in the kitchen at night. I studied them the way my late husband once studied his case files, methodical, precise. He had taught me that justice is not only about knowing the truth, it is about proving it so clearly that no one can look away. I imagined Sarah's face when she finally saw what I held in my hands. I feared the shattering it would cause, but I also hoped for the light it might let in. And so I waited, I planned. The mask he wore was still convincing to her, but masks slip when tugged by the right hand at the right moment. And I was ready. In the nursery, my grandson stirred. I rose to cradle him, rocking gently as his small hand brushed my cheek. His eyes fluttered open for a second, then closed again, trusting the world was safe. I pressed a kiss to his forehead and whispered, "It won't be long now. I promise," because the truth was no longer just a burden I carried. It was a weapon I was sharpening, waiting for the moment to strike. And soon, very soon, he would discover just how dangerous a mother can be when her child is under threat. The house had grown heavy with silence, the kind of silence that presses on your chest and makes every breath feel like a trespass. For weeks, I had carried the truth like contraband, gathering it, guarding it, waiting for the moment when silence would no longer protect but destroy. That moment came on a rain-slicked night. Sarah had tried to make dinner, though she looked pale and brittle as glass. She stirred a pot absent-mindedly until the noodles clumped together, then sank into a chair, trembling with fatigue. Her husband stood behind her, rubbing her shoulders in a show of tenderness, though I could see the impatience in his jaw, the flicker of annoyance when she dropped her fork. "You have to try harder," he murmured, too softly for her to notice the bite in his words. "The baby needs you strong, not falling apart." She nodded, ashamed, as though his disappointment were gospel, and something inside me broke. I could no longer watch my daughter shrink beneath his shadow. I could no longer let his lies feed on her exhaustion. If the truth would shatter her, then so be it. Better shattered by truth than slowly suffocated by deception. That night, after Sarah had retreated upstairs, I retrieved the notebook from its drawer. Pages of dates, photos, bank transfers, and messages stared back at me, a story written in ink and betrayal. I slipped the baby monitor beside it, its red light still blinking, proof captured in the dark. I climbed the stairs with the bundle pressed against my chest, each step louder than the last, until I stood before her bedroom door. I knocked softly. Come in, she called, her voice faint. She sat on the bed, the baby asleep in his bassinet nearby. She looked up at me, her eyes rimmed red, her body small against the expanse of blankets. Mom, she asked, what is it? I closed the door gently behind me. Then I sat beside her and placed the notebook in her lap. What's this? She whispered, running her fingers across the cover. The truth, I said. She opened the first page, photographs of overdue bills, each stamped in red, her brow furrowed. But he told me? I know what he told you, I interrupted softly. Read. She turned the pages, her hands trembling as bank statements appeared, transfers signed in her name but never authorized by her. Her breathing quickened, and then came the messages. Last night was perfect. She'll never know. You deserve better than a tired wife. She froze, her lips parting soundlessly. No, she whispered. That can't be. I reached for the monitor, pressing play. His voice filled the room, low and familiar. Don't worry, she's too tired to notice anything. I'll make sure she signs the transfer papers soon. Followed by a woman's laugh, Sarah flinched as if struck. I watched her crumble, watched the disbelief fight against the evidence laid bare in front of her. Her hands went to her mouth, stifling a sob. Mom whispered, shaking her head. This isn't real. It can't be real. It is, I said gently. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I didn't want you to see this not like this, but he's been taking from you, lying to you, bringing her here into this house while you slept. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She clutched the notebook to her chest as though she could crush the truth back into silence. I trusted him, she choked. I trusted him with everything. I know, I said, pulling her into my arms. And he betrayed it all. But listen to me, Sarah, this is not your failure. This is his. The baby stirred in his bassinet as if awakened by the storm of grief in the room. Sarah rushed to him, scooping him up, holding him so tightly I feared she might break. He did this under our roof, she whispered, rocking her son as tears wet his blanket, while I was too weak to see. You weren't weak, I said firmly. You were healing. And he used that to his advantage. That's on him, not you. Her husband's footsteps sounded on the stairs then, steady, approaching. Sarah stiffened, clutching the baby tighter. Mom, she whispered urgently, what do we do? I rose to my feet, my own fear sharpening into steel. We protect you, and we protect your child. The rest we deal with when the time comes. The door opened, and he entered with that familiar smile plastered across his face. There you are, he said lightly. I was wondering what kept you up. His eyes fell to the open notebook on the bed, the phone in my hand, the tears streaking Sarah's face. For the first time, his mask faltered. What's this? He asked, voice tightening. Your truth, I answered. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, trembling with the weight of what had just been unleashed. Sarah looked at him, then back at me, and though her hands shook, her eyes, still wet with tears, finally began to clear. She had seen enough. Because sometimes the hardest thing a mother can do is not shield her child from pain, but place the truth in her hands and stand beside her as it breaks her. And in that breaking, I saw something new flicker in Sarah's face. Fragile, yes, but real. The beginning of strength. He stood in the doorway like a man caught between two worlds, one where his mask still worked and one where it was crumbling before his eyes. For a moment, he said nothing. His smile twitched, faltered, and then returned, thinner this time, stretched across his face like a thread about to snap. Sarah, he said gently as though he were soothing a child. What's going on here? Why are you crying? Sarah clutched the baby closer to her chest. Her breath came in ragged bursts, her body stiff as if every nerve had been electrified. The notebook lay open on the bed, evidence spilling out like a wound. Don't, she whispered, her voice shaking. Don't you dare talk to me like nothing happened. He stepped into the room, careful, deliberate. Nothing happened, he insisted, his tone low, persuasive. This is all a misunderstanding. Your mother, she's filling your head with paranoia. You know she's been exhausted too. She's confused. Confused? I snapped, rising from my chair. I recorded you, every word, every laugh, every plan you made while my daughter slept. That's not confusion, that's betrayal. He turned to me, eyes flashing. You've always hated me, you've been waiting for any excuse to tear us apart, and now you've poisoned her against me. Sarah's tears blurred her vision, but she didn't look away. I saw the messages, she whispered. Your words, your transfers, how do you explain that? He moved closer, palms outstretched. Sweetheart, those were business expenses. R is a coworker. You think I'd be stupid enough to cheat under this roof, in front of you? Her voice cracked, raw with disbelief. I heard her laugh, I heard you. The baby began to fuss, sensing the storm in the room. Sarah rocked him desperately, as though the motion could drown out the sound of her husband's lies. He changed tactics then, his voice dropping into that familiar, insidious tone of reason. Sarah, tired, you've been struggling, depression plays tricks on your mind, you can't trust what you think you've seen. That's why I've been handling everything for you, for him, for us. Her hands trembled, but she clutched her child tighter as though anchoring herself to something real. Stop calling me weak, she said. The words startled even her. They hung in the air, fragile yet fierce, a spark in the dark. His expression hardened. The mask slipped entirely. If you'd kept it together. Oh, he hissed. None of this would have been necessary. I've carried this family while you sat in bed crying. Do you think raising a child on tears is enough? Do you think bills pay themselves? Enough, I said, my voice like steel. Don't you dare twist this on her. He laughed bitterly, a sharp sound that cut the air. You both think you're so clever, but without me you drown. You can't survive without me, neither of you. Sarah's tears stopped then. She lifted her head, her face streaked but her eyes strangely clear. She looked at him as if seeing him for the first time, not as a husband, not as a partner, but as the fraud he was. You're wrong, she said softly. I already survived 9 months of pregnancy, the pain of childbirth, and nights where I thought I'd lose myself completely. I survived all that without you. He flinched. And now, she continued, her voice rising, I'll survive this too, but not with you. The baby began to cry louder, wailing as though echoing her words. I reached for him, giving Sarah a moment to stand unburdened. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, her shoulders straightening despite the tremor in her body. Get out, she said. He blinked, stunned. What? Get out, she repeated, stronger this time. Take your lies, your bills, your perfume-stained shirts, and get out of this house. His face twisted, anger flooding the cracks of his charm. You don't mean that, you're too weak to mean that. I mean it, she said. I stepped forward, standing beside her, shoulder to shoulder. And if you don't leave on your own, I said evenly, the police will gladly escort you. For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. He glanced at the notebook, the monitor, the phone on the nightstand, all the evidence he had thought was invisible. You'll regret this, he spat. Not as much as I'd regret staying silent, I replied. He left then, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. His footsteps thundered down the stairs, the front door crashing open and closed. Rain swallowed him into the night. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the baby's sobs. Sarah collapsed into the chair, shaking, and I placed her son back into her arms. She clung to him, burying her face in his hair, her body racked with grief and relief all at once. I knelt beside her, wrapping my arms around both of them. It's over, I whispered. You're safe now. But as the storm raged outside, I knew it wasn't truly over. He would not vanish quietly. Men like him never did. The real battle, the one for Sarah's healing, for her strength, for her freedom, was only beginning. The days that followed were not easy, but they were different. The house, once heavy with secrets, breathed again. The air no longer carried the faint perfume of betrayal. The silence of midnight no longer threatened, it soothed. Sarah moved through the rooms with cautious steps, like a survivor testing the strength of the ground after an earthquake. Her eyes were tired, but they no longer carried the dull glaze of denial. She was broken, yes, but broken open, not broken down. And from that breaking came the possibility of healing. We sat together often, sometimes saying nothing at all. She would hold her baby close, rocking him gently, tears sliding down her cheeks without shame. I would sit beside her, my hand on hers, reminding her that silence could be safety now, not secrecy. I don't know how to start over, she whispered one evening, her voice fragile. You already have, I told her. The moment you said get out, you began again. In the weeks that followed, she met with a counselor, someone who listened without judgment and named the shadows she had been living under. Postpartum depression, gaslighting, financial abuse. Words that sounded clinical, but behind them lay her life, her nights, her tears, and little by little she began to reclaim herself. She cooked small meals again, humming under her breath as the pasta boiled. She laughed softly when the baby made faces. She even started walking outside, sunlight on her skin, the stroller rolling gently ahead of her. Every step forward was a victory. Her husband did not return. Legal papers were drawn, restraining orders filed. The evidence I had gathered, photos, recordings, messages, spoke louder than any denial he could muster. He slipped into silence, the kind born of defeat, his power shattered not by rage but by truth. One afternoon, Sarah turned to me as we sat on the porch, the baby gurgling in her lap. The sun dipped low, painting the sky with amber streaks. "Mom," she said quietly, "how did you know what to do? How did you stay so strong?" I thought of her father then, of the lessons he had left me, that silence can be strategy, that patience is a weapon, that truth, no matter how painful, must be carried with courage. I didn't always feel strong, I admitted. But I knew if I broke, you'd break too, so I held on until you could see for yourself. That's what mothers do. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes shimmering. Then she reached across the space between us and took my hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving me, for saving us." I squeezed her fingers gently. "No, sweetheart, you saved yourself. I just held the light until you were ready to walk toward it." That night, as I tucked my grandson into his crib, I watched his tiny chest rise and fall, his lips curved into the faintest of smiles. The storm that had once threatened to drown this house had passed. The walls no longer trembled. The shadows no longer whispered. We had survived. And survival, I realized, is not just about escaping harm. It is about choosing to live again, choosing to laugh, to hope, to love, even after betrayal has scorched the heart. The dawn had come at last. And now, to you, our listener, our companion in this journey, thank you. Thank you for walking with us through the dark hallways of fear and into the fragile light of healing. Stories like this are not easy to tell, but they remind us that even in the deepest night, there is always someone holding the light for us. May you carry that light into your own homes, into your own families. May you find strength when you feel weak, hope when you feel lost, and love that does not betray but protects. From my family to yours, I wish you health, peace, and happiness. Hold your loved ones close, and never underestimate the power of truth and the power of a mother's love. Good night, and God bless.